Hello, you're watching TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. From the frontline to the backstage, we bring you all the latest from Ukraine this week. As we close out 2025 and enter 2026, hopes for peace still appear distant. Russia has stepped up attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving thousands without electricity, water, and heat, especially in the Odessa region. At the same time, Vladimir Putin continues to reject peace proposals, signaling his aim in 2026 to seize the Donbas and Zaporizhia regions. Claims of an alleged Ukrainian attack on his residence have further derailed recent progress in talks with President Trump. On Friday, President Zelenskyy offered the role of Chief of Staff to Military Intelligence Chief Kyrylo Budanov, who accepted the same day. Budanov replaces Andriy Yermak, who resigned in late November after years of tension between the two. Meanwhile, it emerged that Denis Kapustin, commander of the Russian Volunteer Corps, previously reported killed, had faked his death with help from the Ukrainian military intelligence, even collecting a Kremlin reward. We'll break down these developments with our guests, but first, let's take a look at the report from Ukraine this week. While the end of 2025 did not bring about peace in Ukraine, the country's president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, said it's closer than it's ever been.
The peace agreement is 90% ready. 10% remain, and this is far more than just numbers. These 10% contain everything. They will determine the fate of peace, the fate of Ukraine, and the fate of Europe. They will determine how people live. These 10% are about saving millions of lives.
Those 10%, however, are by far the hardest to agree on, as they contain potential territorial concessions in the Donbas region, as well as the fate of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. While Zelenskyy said Ukraine will continue to engage in peace efforts, he also underlined that Kyiv does not want a peace at any cost, adding that a Ukrainian withdrawal from the eastern Donbas region means, quote, everything will be over. The Ukrainian president also reminded the world that Russia's approach to peace negotiations is what's dragging the whole process out.
Can Russia end this war? Yes. Does it want to? No. Can the world force it to do so? Yes, and only this way will it work. Russia does not end its wars on its own. There has never been a war in history that Russia ended by its own free will. Only pressure from others, only under coercion from others.
To help in his efforts of achieving a just and lasting peace, Volodymyr Zelenskyy needs a right-hand man. The person to fill this role was unveiled by the Ukrainian president himself on Friday through a post on social media platform X.
I had a meeting with Kyrylo Budanov and offered him the role of the head of the office of the President of Ukraine. At this time, Ukraine needs greater focus on security issues, the development of the defense and security forces of Ukraine, as well as on the diplomatic track of negotiations, and the office of the President will primarily serve the fulfillment of these tasks of our state.
Kyrylo Budanov, who until now has been playing the role of the chief of the main directorate of intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, has accepted Zelenskyy's proposal. This news follows the volatile end of Andriy Yermak's career as the head of the president's office in late November 2025. Ironically, the former chief of staff tried to get Budanov to resign multiple times throughout his tenure. Yermak resigned from his post following a massive corruption scandal centered around Ukraine's state energy company, Energoatom. The country's anti-corruption watchdogs raided his home, sparking theories of Yermak's involvement in the scheme, which skimmed profits off of the company's energy contracts. Shortly after his resignation, the New York Post reported that Andriy Yermak vowed to, quote, go to the front line, at the same time declaring his innocence in cooperation with anti-corruption bodies. Meanwhile, Russia continues its numerous strike on Ukraine, this time aimed at the city of Zaporizhia on the first night of the year. While the strikes weren't fatal, they did spark fires. A non-residential structure and 2 farm buildings caught fire, while debris damaged residential buildings, road surfaces, and cars in a surrounding area, as reported by emergency services. The second strike was carried out around 2 a.m. on January 2nd, causing a fire at a shopping center that was later extinguished. That's not all this week, as at least 3 people have been killed and dozens wounded, including 3 children, in a wake of Russian attacks across eastern and southern Ukraine. As a result of Tuesday night's massive attack, a residential building was damaged after fire broke out on the 2nd and 6th floors. The Russian strikes also hit the Odessa region's logistical and energy infrastructure. At least 6 people were wounded, including 3 children. In Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, Russian drones struck a residential area, wounding a woman and damaging several homes. Emergency crews rescued a woman from the rubble of a house damaged in a Russian attack in the eastern city of Sloviansk on Monday, after an airstrike hit a residential area and damaged more than 24 homes. In a separate drone attack, 1 civilian was killed and another wounded in the nearby town of Druzhkivka. Not all of Russia's strike found their targets, however. Denis Kapustin, the founder of the Russian Volunteer Corps, who was announced dead last week, faked his death with the help of the Ukrainian military main intelligence directorate. Kapustin was the target of a Russian assassination scheme, offering $500,000 for the deed. Through a fake death, Ukraine not only saved his life, but also procured the reward, which was later used to strengthen Ukraine's drone capabilities. And now, joining us to discuss the developments of this week is Myroslava Gongadze, a non-resident senior fellow from the Atlantic Council. Hello and welcome to Ukraine This Week.
Pleasure to be with you.
So can we start with the wrap-up of President Zelensky's New Year address? It seems quite perplexing. It's sending a very positive message saying that we're 90% here, even though we do know that this rest of that 10% seems to be what the sticking point has always been about. Who do you think this message is targeted towards, and what can we deduce from what he's saying?
This 5 minutes before 2026, Ukrainians saw President Zelensky sitting alone in his office in his almost military attire, and basically the message was not for Ukrainian people. The message was mostly, his audience was mostly Europeans and other Ukrainian partners overseas. He was talking about peace deal, making it a key point for his politics or policies in 2025 and going in 2023. He looked tired, he looked sober, and the message was clear. Ukraine is standing, but Ukraine needs support from its allies. In terms of peace deal, we have to understand that Ukraine is pushed to this negotiation. Ukraine is playing the negotiation game. However, Ukraine understands very well that this is not about Ukraine. This war is about bigger stake, destabilization in Europe, changing the war order by Russia. And yes, this war may be freezed or stopped for a while, but the reality is that if this peace is not just, that's a very temporary solution for the current problem. One thing I noticed, and many other noticed in his speech, he did not say just peace. The term just peace was in use for all this time. Now he is talking about decent peace. So that means that he realized, or Ukrainians are realizing, that just peace is maybe not possible at this moment.
Right, like you said, the changing of the wording sheds a lot of light on the messaging as well, where it does seem increasingly unlikely that a just peace can be achieved. But when it comes to the actual bottleneck of these discussions, the red lines, be it the concession of Donbas or the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, where do you think things might go from here with a referendum supposedly deciding it? What if the Ukrainian people decide not to withdraw from Donbas? What then?
I mean, right now it's very hypothetical because we did not hear from Russia are actually ready even for this 20-point plan. So that's very difficult to say. What we have to understand that President Zelensky, even in his New Year address, he talked about or appeared as a European leader, as a person who is basically holding Europe or holding the holding the war on the territory of Ukraine and giving a chance for Europe to actually prepare for a possible escalation. And in the talking about Zaporizhia power plant, we have to understand that Russia already built the military, basically turned the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, one of the biggest nuclear station in Europe, in a military base. And that's very dangerous, because Russia is using and will be using this as a threat, as a for Europe, because if something happened to the this nuclear station, that would not be about Ukraine. That would be a much bigger problem. It would be basically disaster. I talked to many people who worked there, who were forced, who were tortured, who ran away. Some were pushed to accept Russian passport, to being responsible, trying to work at the station, because actually understanding the danger of the situation. So Zaporizhia nuclear place is a key question for this future settlement, if we will have the one.
All right, you rightfully pointed out that we're probably getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, talking about how the Ukrainian referendum will go ahead without first looking at whether Russia will even accept this 20-point peace plan. And well, just over the past few days, when the discussion is happening and Putin is making the claim that his resident is being bombarded by drones, and earlier on we also saw reports about supposedly Ukrainian targeting some hotels in some occupied regions as well. Do you think that this is an attempt on Russia's part to not even have to negotiate this in the first place, put the blame on Ukraine or even to some extent the United States, and so they have a reason to just tear this whole thing apart?
Obviously, I mean, that's just it's a delay tactic. It's a tactic of blaming Ukraine, and we saw, and good that American intelligence came out with the information that was totally false claim that Ukraine targeted Putin residency or residence. But yes, that's a regular tactic, and if Russia would actually be ready to serious negotiation, that would be we will see it. But in the last few days there are a lot of drone attacks. The central Ukraine were attacked, Odessa were attacked. So the war is going on. The war did not stop, even through the celebration of New Year.
Right. There's another line of thinking. I'm hoping to get your opinion on whether or not it's relatively valid, that we are seeing kind of a Groundhog Day situation where Europe talks with Ukraine, try to come up with a solution, bring it to Donald Trump. Things seem to work well until, Russia have to be a part of it, and they kind of mess the whole thing up again. But these kind of repeated democratic and diplomatic efforts seem to also be an attempt from Ukraine's part to show the United States, show the Trump administration that, yeah, they are the ones that are keen on actually coming to the table to a discussion. So maybe even if this doesn't look like it's doing anything now, this repeated pressure is another sign, another signal to Washington, who is the one that is serious about peace. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Ukraine saw that United States is pushing. They saw the cards that White House has, and they decided, or Zelenskyy decided, to play those cards. And he is showing the willingness of Ukraine for peace. He is showing willingness to even compromise on some very serious issues, serious for Ukraine. However, even in the situation when Ukraine is willing to compromise, Russia bringing this false claims and still blaming Ukraine for all this war. So President Trump is one step saying that Putin told him and he trusts Putin, and another say that no, Putin are lying to us. He is the problem for this peace negotiation. It's clear Russia is not, for now, willing to sit at the serious table. And the problem here a little bit more than just that. It looks a little bit unbalanced that United States is negotiating with Ukraine when Ukraine should negotiate, or Russia should negotiate with Ukraine, with United States and Europe as a guarantors. That would be a normal negotiation. Right now, we have very distorted kind of negotiation that it's difficult to have results. But again, Ukraine is showing the willingness to compromise and hoping that sort of peace, or as President Zelenskyy said, decent peace, will be achieved.
Right, so we'll have to see how that front develops. I mean, in the meantime, I'm also curious to pick your brains on the recent appointments. If we know Zelenskyy has offered the position of Chief of Staff to Military Intelligence Chief Budanov on Friday, which he's already accepted as well. Can you tell us what's the significance of it, and how is that going to impact his cabinet going forward?
I mean, it's a very, very serious step for President Zelenskyy to actually make that decision, because after his former head of presidential administration and a very, very close friend and confidant, I would say, Yermak was forced to resign after the search in his apartment and accusation in corruption. That position was empty. The seat was empty for a while. And now finally, President Zelenskyy made his decision. So what does it say about this step? It says that Zelenskyy and Ukraine is actually moving toward securing security and militarizing a little bit of the government. It's big. I mean, and in the same time, it's logical. It's logical step in the country that fighting the war for 4 years. Budanov is seen as very clear-headed. He had very good connections with Americans, and he had sources, a connection in Russia as well. So that looks like President Zelenskyy is choosing to actually push for this possible solution for this war, and Budanov is seen as one of the key player in this situation. So we will see Budanov as well seen in Ukraine as one of the future or presidential candidate. So does it mean that President Zelenskyy is actually maybe taking him away or taking him out of that possible race? Hard to say. Maybe President Zelenskyy has couple of goals in this appointment, but it's clearly he needs himself. He needs a strong man, clear-headed, cold-blooded men who can maybe build an even stronger state than it is now.
Right.
Or help him to build a stronger state than it is now.
One of the interesting things we're observing, you brought up Yermak earlier being one of Zelenskyy's closest confidant, who's previously taken this position, is actually had a very strained relationship with Budanov, famously having tried multiple times to push Budanov to resign during his tenure. Can we read anything into their relationship and the appointment of Budanov despite of all that?
At this moment, it's very difficult to say, because we have to look at other appointments that will come after this. There are possible changes in other security services of Ukraine, as well as his deputies. I mean, the future Budanov deputies, future the presidential administration deputies. So at this moment, what observers are saying that Yermak is still have a big influence on President Zelensky, despite that he's not anymore in the previous position as a head of presidential administration. But again, yes, that's true. There was a lot of disagreements in policy discussions and so on. Budanov is seen as only one who were actually warning Zelensky before the war that war can start very soon. So that was a part of this kind of disagreement was the presidential was former presidential administration head Yermak. But again, we have to wait at least a couple of days and see the next appointment to make prediction what would happen next.
Right. Closing this chapter, I'm also going to go into this recent development because on Saturday, just before New Year, we actually learned about the death of Denis Kapustin, who also known as White Rex, a commander founder of the Russian Volunteer Corps, who later on actually resurfaced to be alive and well and good. And Ukraine actually collected $500,000 of bounty that was supposed to be on his head. What can we tell from this successful operation against Russia?
We can just say that former head of security service of Ukraine, now new presidential head of presidential administration Budanov, ran a very successful entity. He himself congratulated Kapustin for being alive, and he himself in media published and told everyone that they collected this $100, and that means that Ukraine is doing whatever they can, covert operations as well, to secure their country. That's they would not stay away from kind of operations. I have to say that the first operation, similar operation in Ukraine, number of years ago, the Ukrainian government or Ukrainian intelligence services staged of journalists as well. So this is something that Ukraine apparently does. But this Kapustin, he was a commander of Russian battalion, and it looks like he's returning back to the command of the battalion.
Amazing. So with this operation, a lot of things seems to have to go right for it to actually happen. Would you check it to the competence of the Ukrainian intelligence services, or more of the lack of oversight and incompetence on the part of the Russians?
I would say it's a competence and a very organized, strategic work of the intelligence services of Ukraine.
Right, and again, like the HR even claimed that they have they have received that $500,000 bounty that's going to go into Ukraine's war coffer, just to kind of rub it in a little bit more, which is kind of a welcome sight for the Ukrainians. Now we have a little bit of time left, and I would like to pick your brains on the situation in the current front line. We do know after this end of 2025 year report that Russian advances in the front line this year has been slow and grueling, but it's not been easy for the Ukrainian as well. Hulepole, Pokrovsk, Donbass. Putin has announced that he wants to capture the entire Donbass and even the Zaporizhzhia region. Do you think that Ukraine would have to withdraw from Donetsk entirely, which does have some of the most fortified position along the entire front?
For now, the discussions during this peace negotiation discussions is only about the stopping on the front line. However, Ukraine ordered many villages in the Chernihiv and Sumy region to their population to evacuate because they were bombarded under bombardment all the time. And to save people, Ukraine is asking people to leave some of the frontline villages. However, again, they are not ready for now to talk about withdrawing from Kharkiv, Donetsk, or Zaporizhia region. Ukraine right now is holding the line of possible compromise according to the current front line.
All right, so it does seem like even though the situation is indeed hard, Ukraine is still standing strong. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of Ukraine This Week. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.